We are in London and we're here at Bonhams. Jonathan Darracott, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
But we thought more broadly it would be interesting to talk to you about your history in watches.
So I started as a jeweller. That's where I came from. I went to art school. I did that whole side of things. And at the end of art school, I was very interested in the change of items during time, which led me on to watches. And then I started going down the rabbit hole. And one of my tutors said, once you go down this rabbit hole, you're not coming back. I've seen it before. I've seen what people do, and it's exactly what happened to me. And it was one of those things that when I decided that I was possibly going to be wanting to create watches, I thought I need to know what's inside. I need to know how it works and that's what started me down the road. Interestingly enough, a friend of mine who was at the Royal College of Art called me up and said, "Oh, I just saw this guy. He did a talk called George Daniels, and he said he's looking for an apprentice." In actual fact, that was a joke that he had made, but I took it seriously and I gave George Daniels a call. I found his number, gave him a call, made this rather embarrassing call, and I got the very short answer of no. And it was like, okay, oh God, sorry for
you have bothered me this morning, but thank you.
And I wrote him a letter.
To apologise.
And at the time I was into calligraphy, and so I wrote him a letter. I didn't realise that he was too. So this touched a nerve with him. Went back to college and studied watchmaking. So that's where I came from. And then went to Worcester, did the course there, did some time on the bench, and the job at Sotheby's came up. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting.
And how many years have you been at Bonhams?
Close to 10 years. 5 years in Switzerland doing manufacture, so I stepped out of, because I was with Sotheby's for a while, for 12 years, and then stepped out and did manufacture, and then did some consulting, and they got a call from the managing director at the time, Matthew Girling, said, "You probably know why I'm calling." I'm going, no clue. He said, "Oh, well, how about coming back and joining us?"
We've got a wonderful selection of 5 watches here that Jonathan's picked for us, and I've picked one kicker there as my standout highlight of the auction scene, which we will come to in a moment. Jonathan, was there a watch that really captured you in those early stages when you were watchmaking? Was there a Daniels or was there an AP?
Close to a Daniels. It was actually, a Breguet tourbillon. And it was actually down the street here, and it really captured my imagination.
36, 37 mil.
Oh, it's a small one, 37 mil. I just remember looking at it and just going, that is so beautiful. It ticked all the boxes for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the cage was at 6 o'clock, and it was cut away a little bit, so you can see that guilloche on the base plate or where it might be.
Exactly that. And at the time, it was quite an exposed and very simple. The rest of the watch was very simple, and then it just had this beautiful mechanics inside it.
And that was under Daniel Roth as well, I think, was there at Breguet at the time. Or was
possibly
it prior? Yeah. Let's talk brands, because actually it's interesting that you mentioned Breguet, because they are, to me, one of the great opportunities still out there from a buying perspective.
Absolutely.
Because the watchmaking is almost unparalleled, but yet the market hasn't in the last few years responded to that, although that's changing slightly. What are you seeing out there, Jonathan? Who's moving? Who's going up? Who's going down? What's happening out there?
That's very interesting, because I do this thing where buy, keep, or sell, and for years I've been banging on about the independent. I mean, literally for the last 8 years I've been banging on about the independents, and everyone's been going, huh? And what? Yeah, okay. And now they're beginning to really take on, and it's because there's something so special about them. They make such fantastic things. But then you've got, as you say, the brands that are making series watches. So Breguet is a very good example. Jaeger-LeCoultre, I think, is another one that is underappreciated. They've done some extraordinary things.
I get the sense that the collectors, say 5-10 years ago, the big collectors who had a bit of everything in the past, adopted the idea of an independent, because I think there was an inherent risk to start with, because there wasn't quite the clarity on the product.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's that inherent risk. With the independents now, that because they're getting that traction, and people, they've been around for a long time. I mean, Roger's been making watches for 30 years now. So he's got the name, and before him, Daniels was, his movement has been, or escapement has been taken on by Amiga. So they've become established names. So it's much easier to make that move. It's much more. But it's brand awareness.
What is it about Bonhams that maybe is worth expressing to buyers and sellers out there that's maybe different?
We have 3 tiers of sales. So the fine sale, which is what we're surrounded by today, which are the best of the best. Then we have our mid-tier sales, which are roughly from £2,000 to about £10,000, and every 3 months we have a sale of around 200 watches in that genre. And then we have below that we have our tier 3 sales, which are £300 to £2,000.
It feels that because there's something at every price point, at least as a buyer, but the problem is it's very approachable. You know,
Yes.
it's that there are options at every price point, and that's exciting because often it can feel, I think, for buyers of primary watches, so new watches out there that may walk into a boutique and not feel that welcome by the experience, and certainly as buyers at auction houses, some of the big names out there, it's also a little bit maybe less welcoming, intimidating. So that price point is quite an interesting differentiator.
We pride ourselves in being approachable. You know, if you send us an email, we will answer, and we will answer very quickly. And if you come and talk to us, we'll talk you through everything that we've got and everything that we know. Whether it's online or whether it's a live auction like this, anybody can partake.
Let's talk about these watches we've got here, Jonathan, because these are some of the highlights from the fine auction coming up this week. Let's start with this Cartier, because if there were a brand that maybe has been unstoppable, it's hard to think of another that could compete maybe with Cartier. Vintage Cartier seems to be going from strength to strength. I can't see it slowing down. There are some grumblings out there from collectors who have had pieces made for them, who feel maybe there are too many pieces being made from Cartier. But other than that, the shapes, they've infiltrated culture.
It's a tank normal. But what's special about this, it was given in 1922, so it was made in 21 or beginning of 22. So this is already 100 years ago, 100 years ago, and that exact model is being produced and sold today. But at this time, there were probably less than 100 of these in existence. This is literally a birthplace. This is like a foundry of watches. This is the beginning of wristwatches, and for that I love it. And what it is extraordinary is on the back of it.
What does it say?
It has an inscription, and I don't have my glasses on, so I can't actually see it.
You're paraphrasing.
Roughly, it says from the staff to Mr. Gardner of the Daimler Car Company. So two massive brands meshing together.
Did he put in a long shift there, or?
I looked him up and I couldn't find him.
Really? But you know, the funny thing is, and I love inscriptions. I mean, I've got one or two. In fact, I've got a Vacheron, an aluminium Vacheron pocket watch I bought from Bonhams in Paris.
Fantastic.
And it's got an inscription of whom that went to.
Yep.
And some collectors love it. And let's not forget, this watch has been reissued in some form or another, because we've got a platinum variation this year with a platinum bracelet and tank normal, which probably, being there at Watches and Wonders 2023, probably the watch of the show. It's got some storytelling on the dial, it's fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's in wonderful condition for the age.
And we've checked the movement, all the numbers and everything all match up, so it is
absolutely
all correct. Yeah.
Moving on to a watch that you know, on first inspection people might think they know, and it's a watch that people, you know, out on the street may recognise immediately as being a Rolex. But this is something that's slightly different.
Yep.
And tell us why. What makes this dial stand out from other Rolexes that people might think they know?
So it's very rare that Rolex allow somebody else to encroach on their brand. But they worked with this company, Comex. Comex is on the dial, and they were working with the divers to make a safe watch that would enable divers to do saturation diving, so deep diving. The person who gave it to me, it was a diver, he says that the divers would spend months at a time down in the saturation tanks. I mean, my memory, I was so in awe of him when he was talking about. He was a diver.
So this was issued to him.
This was not actually issued to him. This was issued to a friend of his. The interesting thing about this is that it's got the valve, which was
Mm-hmm.
made these watches special.
And it's funny that actually that was the only instance maybe that the valve could be useful
Yes.
to a wearer, to an owner.
Exactly, yes.
Whereas most of us wearing a helium escape valve now are not necessarily putting it through its paces.
Exactly. This comes with lots of other things. It comes with a dive suit, dive helmet. I mean, upstairs we've got a shrine to Comex,
Really?
which is just all the stuff that comes
anyone watching this will appreciate how much I love the merch, the watch merch. But that's the ultimate. The OG watch merch is actually stuff that these divers used. I mean, that's the age of the tour watch there. Something that's become very much a modern piece of design, a modern icon. Jean was probably the first that I fell in love with, I guess. And this is not one of the souscription models that he created initially to help fund the business, but has a very similar DNA, a look to it and a feel. Tell us what we have here. Is that a platinum? I think it's platinum. It feels like platinum.
This is indeed platinum. And for a watchmaker, this ticks so many boxes. So first of all, you've got this beautiful Breguet symmetrical dial. So that's already a plus point. Then you've got this proper aperture for the tourbillon cage, so you can really see it functioning, doing its stuff. But then, in addition to that, not satisfied. He is a watchmaker's watchmaker.
Yeah.
Not satisfied with that, he puts in a dead seconds. So you don't get that sweep seconds that you would normally get in a mechanical watch.
Not to be mistaken for a quartz watch, for anyone who's looking at it or wearing it. Very complicated to achieve.
It needs to continuously do that without moving out, because if it moves out a sector every minute, then halfway through the day, it's going to be halfway through a second. So it is incredibly difficult to do. It is really, really special. But then to add to that, he adds another sophistication of timekeeping, which is when you wind up a spring, at the top of the spring you've got a lot of power, and at the bottom end of the spring you've got very little power. So it changes the isochronism of the balance. And so he added what's called a remontoire. The remontoire is a very, very small spring that winds up continuously to give an absolute gentle, constant power, constant force to the escapement, to give it the isochronism that it needs. So it's
one of those magical things about watchmaking that a lot of people won't ever understand entirely, but it's just lovely to know. And you're right, the balance is beautiful because you've got power reserve there at 12 o'clock that captures and sweeps across there in a retrograde fashion.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's got all that DNA. It's got the Jean crown there, that knurled crown. The case is just beautiful. The weight is sumptuous. The subdial,
it is. It's a watchmaker's watch. What's fantastic about Jean is that he grew up as a restorer, and that's why one of the reasons his watches are so interesting, because it has, as you say, that DNA, that push of horology all the way through its design.
Incredible, incredible. What a watch! And then, as if that weren't enough, you've come at us with another heavy hitter of the independent scene. So you've potentially got two of the finest independent watches that we've ever seen. And this is particularly interesting for those in the UK and who've got a particular interest in British watchmaking.
Yes.
Tell us what we've got here, Jonathan.
So here we have a Daniels. So this is the Millennium. So this is Daniels, George Daniels, going into wristwatches. So he made a few wristwatches, but then this was a series that he did in conjunction with Roger Smith. So Roger Smith was predominantly putting these watches together. It has all the Breguet-esqueness, the George Daniels. It's got elements of Roger Smith slipping in there as well. It's got the English engraving on the back that you don't see in other watches, and the engine turning of the dial is incredible because every single section has a different form of engine turning. So it is extraordinary. And then of course it's all based on the coaxial design, which I heard George Daniels talking about how he designed it. For years he was trying to make this escapement that would eliminate the need for lubrication in a watch, which degrades over time and then destroys the timekeeping of a watch. Seeing his designs, and it's like You know the story of Harrison. Harrison
Marine chronometer.
for the chronometers for marine timing, and he did the same thing. These big, huge, chunky things that he was making, and then suddenly there was a quantum leap, and suddenly the one that he produced that was successful was literally you could hold it in your hand. And George did the same sort of thing. You could see his designs, and then suddenly it all distilled. It's extraordinary, and it's like this switch, and then suddenly he had the beginnings of the most extraordinary advancement in horology.
I can't imagine what it would have been like for Roger rocking up Monday mornings, Tuesday mornings at work, being observed by him, putting this watch together. It must have been like, we think we've got a stressful day ahead, but that must have been quite something. Because as we've touched on already, he was a man that was direct. He knew what he wanted. He wasn't afraid to tell you what he thought. It must have been quite something for him to work under those conditions.
I think there were various people that have worked with George over time, and Roger was the one that survived.
Yeah. He cared as much about the decoration as he clearly cared about the technical.
Yes.
That's interesting, because he innovated on the coaxial in a way that almost no one else has, and then he's finishing a watch in a way that no one else dared consider. And
I think you can understand a bit more about that if you see the books that George Daniels wrote. And it wasn't the technical advances of Breguet, it was the art of Breguet. Horology it's about the art. You know, we talk about the tourbillon. It's not because it's a technical advantage. It's a sculpture, and it's finished to perfection. And it's the same with this and the design. And it's I mean there are so many elements of this that are Breguet. It's extraordinary.
What's the estimate on it, just roughly, so we can get an idea of the type of number we're talking for this type of watch?
This is in at £400,000 to £600,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well worth it.
Beautiful.
If you have that money.
Yeah. So we're moving to your final selection of your 5, and then we'll come to my kicker. And it's a watch that will be recognisable from across the room. Ultimately, that's what watchmaking design is all about, is creating things that are recognisable. The hearsay and the rumours about this watch and its design have sort of been at fever pitch the last few years. It seems to be a watch that's transcended everyone and everything. This is the Cartier Crash.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about this one.
So this is so originally this was designed in the 1960s by Jacques Cartier. It was when Cartier was producing watches on their own. Cartier London.
The key.
They were producing watches and designing watches on their own. I mean, there was always discussion with the Cartier brand. They had their own workshops, and they made these watches individually. They weren't stamped out. They were literally handcrafted, which enabled them to create something as quirky and bizarre as the Cartier Crash. And you know, as you said, the stories are that it was a Benoit that came into the workshops that had been crushed in a crash, and this is where the design came from, or it was Salvador Dali, the tribute to Salvador. Apparently none of those are true. It was just something that they designed as like, what happens if we just play around with the
when it comes to case shapes, generally speaking, they've got a pedigree in amazing shapes, and it wouldn't be a surprise that this was something that came out of the workshop at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. But this particular one is a re-edition. So this was done in France in 1991, and it was a limited edition, and it's beautifully made. It's got a Jaeger movement in it, and it's a great example of the crash watch.
Do you think in 1991, it's hard to put ourselves in that time, but what was the model? Was Cartier where was the brand at the time? Where was the appetite maybe for this type of watch? Because it's unusual. The way it sits on the wrist is unusual. The way it's integrated into the strap is very unusual.
Yep.
Do you think there was a real interest in this at the time? Was this just for a very good client of Cartier in Paris, or
no? I mean, they produced a series of them, but at this time, Cartier was probably recognised more for their jewellery. I mean, obviously they were making the tank, and they were making all these things that were iconic, but they were predominantly a jewellers.
Not dissimilar to Tiffany, maybe, in recent years, where you could buy a Tiffany watch from a store, but you'd have to be a a good client, maybe for some other things before you had the chance to do it.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And we don't often think back to the time in which these were made.
Like the Cartier tank. You know, at that time, wristwatches were not a thing. You know, people weren't wearing, they were still wearing pocket watches and occasionally wristwatches. They were just gaining interest.
What's your advice to collectors out there, to buyers out there in this current market?
Talk to people. Educate yourself. If you talk to everybody and get an idea of what's going on, then you're going to feel in a much safer place to be able to make a decision for yourself.
Right, on to the last one. It's a bit of a kicker because I think there's a few things in the collector psyche that are, well, it takes a bit of time before they crystallize in the mind of the collector, but I think everyone wants a solid gold watch. I think that this, for me, and I saw this in the lineup and I just immediately loved it, it's a Royal Oak, it's a perpetual calendar, Conti and Perpetuel, depending on where you're from. AP obviously very well recognised for the two elements in this watch, the Royal Oak and the perpetual calendar. And in fact, probably more, traditionally associated with the perpetual calendar than even the Royal Oak.
Yes,
because they were very technical in the early days. The idea of a solid gold watch, I like an understated watch generally that doesn't scream and shout, but just to have that one. And it really is a classic. It's one of those watches that is just an absolute classic. It doesn't have the tapestry finish on the dial, which I think is lovely as well. But instead it's got these blued hands and a beautifully balanced dial. The stick hands, the hands are blued on the sub-dials, not on the main hours and minutes, but just absolutely beautiful. What's your opinion on the exterior? Do you think this is a watch that's
good?
been...
It's really good, and for its because it's in at 40 to 60,000. It's an extraordinary value for money.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that bracelet is just wonderful.
And it
fits like a glove.
There you
go. It fits like a glove. It's from my year of birth, so it is a late 80s watch, which, come on now. God, oh God, Jonathan, I came here to do a bloody recording. I've come out with a watch. No, this is brilliant. No, I love it. I love it. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. Oh, wow. And there's just such a wonderful feeling of heft in the design. And okay.
And a perpetual calendar.
Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Guys, thanks for joining us as always. Please leave your comments below. Do you think this is the ultimate 5-watch collection? What would you chop in and out? Thank you as always for joining us. Until next time, go well.